Welcome to City Beat. I am your host, Greg, from the Lewiston City Library. Joining me today is Joe DuPont from Idaho Fish and Game. Welcome, Joe. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Greg.
Well, it's great to have you on the show today. We were going to talk a little bit first. So you're the regional fisheries manager here in the area. So what exactly does that mean?
So the regional fisheries manager is the person who oversees the fisheries program in the entire Clearwater region. And so the Clearwater region is the entire Clearwater drainage that goes from Idaho, from the Washington border all the way to the Montana border. And it goes all the way down to Hells Canyon Dam, along the Salmon River, almost all the way to Montana again. So it's a very large area. And so
Absolutely.
I supervise 7 different people that collect data on fisheries, and our job is to help make sure that we protect, perpetuate our fisheries, as well as provide opportunities for anglers to harvest them or catch and release. So.
Oh, that's great, because I'm a big fan of the harvesting and catching, releasing both. So, recently there's been a lot of questions and kind of concerns about some gill nets here near the confluence of the Clearwater and the Snake. Can you talk a little bit about those and what's going on?
Certainly. So I think it was last week, a couple nets showed up on the confluence of the Snake and Clearwater River, and those are actually nets that the Nez Perce tribe puts out. And those aren't the only places they've been putting nets out. They also put them down in the Lower Granite Pool, about 5 or 10 miles downriver from the confluence, and sometimes you'll even see them up in the Clearwater. And so a lot of folks actually ask, why can they do that? We only can fish with rod and reel. Why are they allowed to do that? And it's important to know that court cases have determined that the tribe is allowed to harvest their fair share of fish, and their fair share is half the available fish out there. And it's up to them to decide how to catch those fish. And just like Washington and Oregon can decide how to catch them, so can Idaho and so can the tribe. And in fact, the states of Washington and Oregon, they decide a certain percent of their fisheries can be caught through commercial fisheries, gill nets, and a certain percent through sport fisheries. Idaho can make that same decision, and we decide all our fisheries should be caught through sport fisheries. And the tribe does as well. And so they like to do a lot of their fishing through netting. They also do some spearing and rod and reel as well. And as long as they don't go over their share of fish, you know, they're perfectly legal to do so. Well, one of the things that we are concerned with Fish and Game is, as long as they're not going over their fair share, as long as their netting isn't really restricting our anglers, if they don't cut totally across the river, we're fine with it. If they're not dangerous, in other words, they're not lighted, that would be a concern with us, because a lot of people like to fish at night. So it's alarming at first for people because they're not allowed to do it, but it's totally legal, and for the most part, we all can get along, and it's been happening actually quite a bit for the last 8 years now.
That was going to be my next question. Was, you know, how long has it been going on? It's nothing recent, nothing brand new.
No, and fishing right at the confluence where a lot of people like to fish is relatively new. 2 years ago they did it, and this is the second time that they've done it. So I think anytime something new happens, people that haven't seen it before get all wound up. So.
Oh yeah, definitely. Okay.
If I can add on a little more?
Please do.
And so it's important to know that sport anglers in Idaho, when fishing the Clearwater, will catch in a year 10,000 fish. The Nez Perce tribe, even with their netting, might get 2,000 to 3,000 fish. So we get considerably more than they do. And so that's also important to realize that they don't have a lot of anglers out there, so they often have to employ techniques that they can be more effective at and catch more fish.
Oh. And so, keeping on the fishing theme here, let's talk a little bit about the Steelhead and Chinook fishery for this fall of 2014. Kind of how's that looking this year?
So this year is actually looking very good. The fall Chinook fishery is one of the largest fisheries we're going to see since the dams went in. We're expecting over 55,000 fall Chinook to enter Idaho, which is a lot of fish for people to catch. And one of the exciting things about these fish is they're very big. In fact, this year they're bigger than we've ever seen, at least since the dams went in. Most of the fish are around 20 pounds, which is a heck of a fish to battle, and some of them are very tasty. I can tell you the fall Chinook are different than the spring Chinook. They enter the Idaho and they spawn very quickly, so a lot of their energy goes into their eggs, and when that happens, their flesh quality goes down. So sometimes you have to be a little picky about what you want to keep to eat, but if you want to smoke them, almost all of them are great.
Great.
And then as far as the steelhead fishery goes, last year was a very poor fishery in the Clearwater River. and we had to have restrictive rules on them. Well, we're getting a lot of questions are we going to have the same restrictive rules again this year? And I'm happy to say that the run is looking very good this year. In fact, we're expecting 3 times as many fish into the Clearwater River drainage than we had last year. And if you compare it to 2 years, it's about 30% more. And so
Wow.
people should expect better fishing this year than these past 2 years. So the harvest opener in the Clearwater River drainage starts on October 15th. Right now, the most of the Clearwater River is catch and release. These fish are just right now really starting to pour into the Clearwater. So if you're fishing there right now and catch and release, they should just be getting better and better day after day. In fact, probably 1,000 fish a day are rolling into the Clearwater right now. So.
Wow, well, that's good news for me because I'm not the best angler, but I really like to do it. So I really like to do that. I just wanted to go back real quick and kind of clarify something. When you were talking about the Chinook, you mentioned their flesh quality. And, you know, for me being a layman, what exactly does that mean?
So most people, when they catch Chinook or eat Chinook or see them in the store, see these bright pink meat, bright orange meat, and that's what we all like to eat. They're very flavorful, rich in oils, but as they start getting older, closer to spawning, their meat turns paler, more white. It's not quite as rich, and the meat gets softer. So as I indicated earlier, the fall Chinook, when they get ready to spawn, their energy goes in the eggs, so it comes out of the meat into the eggs, and that quality goes down. It's not as pink, not as rich, not as firm.
So the flesh is just kind of the color and consistency of the meat, really, more than anything.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Now, I've also heard that this year you've done some really interesting work with Steelhead in your region here. Can you talk a little bit about that, what you've been doing with them? And
are you referring to sturgeon? Or
sturgeon, I'm sorry, I've got Steelhead on the brain. It's kind of that time of year.
We have been doing some pretty cool work in Steelhead too, but one of my favorite projects that I've been involved with over the last 5 years has actually been on sturgeon. And the reason we started this was over the past 10 years, occasionally when we see a dead sturgeon, we'd autopsy it and we'd find hooks inside their bellies. And we were wondering if that was what actually caused the sturgeon to die. And because these fish live so long, we wanted to make sure we got ahead of the boat and make sure we were doing what was necessary to keep this fish population thriving. And so we started this study where we actually started catching fish and using metal detectors, seeing if there was metal inside them. And lo and behold, we started finding a lot of these fish actually did have metal in them, and we started wondering, what is this metal? Is it really hooks? And so working with a veterinarian out of WSU, we started bringing a portable x-ray onto the boat, and we found out that, yes, there are hooks in a lot of these fish. And then we started wondering, well, is this really a problem? And so we started this big study, a 4-year study, where we tried to catch as many of these fish we did. We'd measured different attributes on them to see if they were actually surviving worse or better than, or the same as fish without hooks. And I'm happy to report after 5 years we're finding a few things that it looks like those fish are actually that get the hooks in them. And by the way, the reason they're getting the hooks in is when people break them off on the bottom from fishing. These sturgeon go around, they're like vacuum cleaners, smelling anything they can that might be edible and sucking them up. So if there's a hook with bait on it, they tend to suck it up. And what we're finding is these fish actually are able to pass these hooks through. So we've x-rayed fish, many fish, that one time they have hooks in them, the next time they don't, then they have them back in again. And sometimes when they get a whole lot of hooks, especially if they're covered with line, it can cause their growth to grow down. But for the most part, we don't think this is having a large impact on the fishery. We did create a new rule to help prevent more hooks getting broken off on the bottom, and that now when you're fishing for sturgeon, the dropper weight that you use has to be on a separate line, and it has to be lighter than the main line. And the reason we do this is typically when you snag up, you snag the weight, and this allows you to break the weight off and retrieve the hook without leaving it on the bottom. And I'm not sure if we have enough data to say that, but when we first started doing this work, 50% of the fish over 6 feet long had hooks in them, and each year it seems to be going down a little bit. But at this point, we're not sure if that's the reason, but it certainly could. So
that's pretty impressive that they can actually pass a hook through their entire system.
Yeah. One of the exciting things for you sturgeon anglers out there is the last week we were out sampling sturgeon, we actually caught sturgeon that exceeded the state record. So the state record right now is 395 pounds. Unfortunately, now you can't really break the state record because you can't keep a sturgeon, but in our research we're actually able to weigh fish, and this one weighed about 420 pounds. It was almost 10.5 feet long, so there are some really giant fish out there for you anglers out there, and this population looks very stable right now, and like I said, we're doing this research to help make sure that they stay that way. So.
Well, that sounds great, and that's a big fish.
Yeah, yes it is.
I bet that was fun to catch.
Yes, that's one of our tough parts about our job. Sometimes we have to go out there and catch these fish and sweat, and foil over all this hard work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, was there anything else you'd like to add about the sturgeon? I've still got steelhead on my brain, so I had another question about those for you. But
well, we did another study at the same time, and so while we were fishing for these fish to see if they had metal in them, we are also evaluating if we could use different hook types to reduce deep hooking rates. So, and there's different types of hooks out there. Some are J hooks, and that's typically what everybody fishes with. And there's a circle hook that actually curls all the way around, and the point points back at the shank. And a lot of fisheries in the ocean use these and require these because typically what happens when somebody sets a hook, they pull out and they don't hook until they're coming out their mouth, and you don't hook them down deep in the stomach or throat. And so some of the thoughts were, well, maybe we should do this for sturgeon, so we make sure that we're not hooking them deep, because when you hook them deep, that's when you tend to have higher mortality rates. Well, through the study, we were comparing the two hooks, and really, you never hook sturgeon deep, regardless of what hook you're using. So there is no need for a rule restriction, which is great, because we don't like to restrict anglers more than necessary. And I think the way that we are catching and release fishing on sturgeon is not really having an impact on them. So again, another good news for sturgeon fishermen and the sturgeon population out there.
Well, that's great. Great.
Yeah.
Well, we've just got a couple minutes left here on the show. Is there anything else that you've got going on right now that you'd like to talk about?
Well, if I can talk a little bit more about salmon and steelhead, I'd like to bring up a couple points that a lot of anglers ask me. And
Absolutely.
so for salmon and steelhead, the runs vary from year to year. Like I said, last year was really low for steelhead, and this year's up. 3 years ago, we had record numbers, and people are asking, why does it fluctuate so much? And so for the most part, hatcheries release the same amount of smolts every year. So smolts are the fish that are migrating to the ocean. And assuming that there aren't any disease factors, there's something going on in the environment that influences these numbers. And through research, we've learned that there's two major factors. One is, what are the ocean conditions? And what I mean by ocean conditions are, some years you'll have cold upwellings, and those cold upwellings bring a lot of nutrients that can feed the smaller critters out there that the young salmon can eat, and young fish. And the more young fish and young other critters out there, the more it feeds the whole food chain, and the survival can vary considerably. And the research shown that that's probably the major factor that influences these hatchery fish. Now, another thing that can also influence them is the runoff in the spring. When we release all these fish in the spring, and if there's good flows going down to the ocean, they get there a lot quicker, a lot easier. It's a shorter period of time, so there's less predators that can feed on them, and so survival will also go up in those years. So if you're a salmon or steelhead fisherman and you're wondering how it's going to look for the future, you can look at what the river's running in the spring, and the ocean conditions also play a big role. If you ever hear about El Nino and La Nina, the El Nino is typically bad for salmon and steelhead. That's warmer ocean conditions, and the La Nina is typically good. So pay attention to those things when the weatherman's talking, and it kind of gives you some insight on what you might expect for the future for our salmon and steelhead fisheries.
Well, that's great. And I got to say, Joe, it's been great talking with you today. Thank you so much for being on the show. And on behalf of my guest, Joe DuPont, and everyone else here at City Beat, we hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.